intense of the weapon used. There is more here now on the man who may have done it, Lee Oswald. One police official, the head of the Dallas Homicide Division, Will Fritz, says that Oswald has not admitted anything yet, but he looks like a good suspect. That is all we have. There are many circumstantial things that would seem to link the man to it, but we do not yet have anything definitive. Frank?
I think we might note that when the news was first received that the president had been wounded, the stories noted that Texas is the seat of some strong sentiment toward the conservative side of the political spectrum, and there was perhaps an assumption on the part of a good many that some member of some extreme right-wing organization might have committed this atrocity. I know that in some sidewalk interviews that were done in New York, this was the immediate assumption on the part of persons there. And now we find that the prime suspect in the case, and he is only that at the moment, has an identity of association with extreme left-wing groups. This is Lee Oswald, 24-year-old former Marine, who is being questioned about the assassination of the president as well as the fatal shooting of a Dallas policeman a short time later. So it will be some time before we know about that. And we have canceled all of our programs this evening so that we might keep you abreast of the developments as they continue to occur. It goes without saying that everything really is simply in a state of shock, and all we're trying to do now is be around and see this as it happens and take you there, not in any sense of morbid curiosity, but because we know that you would want to witness these events. The president's plane is on its way to Washington, should be arriving there shortly. And there is this about this sort of thing, as staggering and as cataclysmic as it is humbling in its own way. It makes us all realize our own mortality and what humans we are. And it is safe enough to say, certainly it can be said by those who remember the death of President Roosevelt, that this afternoon, wherever you were and whatever you might have been doing, when you received the word of the death of President Kennedy, that is a moment that will be emblazoned in your memory, and you will never forget it as long as you live.
I think you're right, Frank. I can recall only one other occasion in which I underwent a similar experience. It was on a transport ship which had just docked in Saipan Harbor in April of 1945 when I learned that then President Roosevelt had died. And I think I can remember how the harbor smelled and how high the sun was and where the clouds were and everything else. And certainly today will be as indelibly dug into my mind as that morning was. It's a shocking thing, and it's just simply unbelievable. It couldn't have happened.
Perhaps we should remind you again that the people of the Soviet Union have been advised of the passing of, or the assassination of President Kennedy. There has been no official reaction beyond a telephone conversation between Andrei Gromyko and the American ambassador to Russia, Voykoler, and he expressed his profound shock and regrets and said that the official reaction of the Soviet government would be forthcoming shortly. But all the other leaders of the major nations of the world have been heard from. They try as best as anyone can to express their feelings at a time like this. The important part is simply that some gesture is made and that they try in whatever way they can to let you know their own sense of loss and that they understand the profound shock on the part of the American people who will realize the loss more keenly than anyone else. George Meany, who is president of the AFL-CIO, has sent a telegram to President Lyndon Johnson pledging him the full support of the nation's biggest labor organization. Meany also sent a telegram of condolences to Mrs. Kennedy. The top official of the AFL-CIO learned of the assassination of President Kennedy while he was driving to Washington from New York, where he had presided at this week's AFL-CIO convention, which was addressed only last week by the late President Kennedy. Bill?
There must be, in all of this, some forward motion, even in the initial moments of shock. Even as President Lyndon Johnson, the moment he was sworn in to succeed John Fitzgerald Kennedy, turned to someone on Air Force One, the presidential plane, and said, I think it was all right, let's get this plane to Washington. That may sound brusque, it may sound somewhat cold, but it is indicative that the affairs of the country, the running of the government must go forward, that it is a continuing process. And certainly there are people who, with no malice, with no cold-bloodedness, will be sitting in places all over the country and trying to determine exactly what impact this man's death will have on the future of this country, on the future of both political parties, and indeed on the future of the world and on its hopes for peace. They will recall the strength with which Mr. Kennedy faced up to the Russian threat in Cuba. They will wonder if we have other men who have the same strength, more strength, less strength. It's a shocking thing when the prow of the country, as it were, is suddenly removed from the ship and then another takes its place. We at NBC have canceled all of our regular programming for the day so that we may bring you whatever news there is, whatever details there are of this crisis in our government. And we will continue with our coverage in a moment, but right now we pause for station identification. We are back now, basing our operation here at NBC in New York, bringing you the reports from all over the country, indeed from all over the world, on this momentous day when we have lost a president and had another one installed. In about 4 or 5 minutes, if the plane is on schedule, Air Force One is expected to land at Andrews Air Force Base just outside Washington. On the plane will be the body of President Kennedy, will be President Lyndon Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Kennedy. President Johnson is expected to have something to say at the airport to the American people. There has been no public quotation from him as yet. Understandably, even as the rest of the nation, Mr. Johnson is trying to assemble his thoughts, trying to accustom himself to what has happened to the country and to him. He will officially move into the actions of being president later this evening. He will meet at the White House with Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, Presidential Advisor McGeorge Bundy, who was so very close to President Kennedy, will also meet with Mr. Johnson. And following that meeting, there will be a meeting with a bipartisan congressional delegation. The leaders from both parties will come to the White House, and undoubtedly it's simply a question of saying there may be political differences between us, but we are all Americans, and we will all work together for what we feel is best for this country. Frank?
Just to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, and Robert Abernathy of NBC News.
Bob, and I understand the president's changed his mind. He's not going to talk.
We are at Andrews Air Force Base waiting for the plane to arrive here. Several thousand people.
You're on the speaker.
Several thousand people waiting for the president to arrive at Andrews Air Force Base.